is the Apparelist podcast, designed to bring you real-life conversation about high-level topics relevant to the decorated apparel community.
Welcome to this episode of the Apparelist podcast, everybody. I am your hostess with the mostest, Cassie Green, and today we are sitting down with Ian Scherber, Vice President of Business Development at Jaanuu. Ian's story is pretty unique in that he has touched nearly every aspect of the apparel decorating business community. So a little backstory, I first met Ian in person a couple years ago at the Apparel Decoration Summit, and he honestly is just a force to be reckoned with. At a very young age, Ian found himself working in the industry, but I am going to let him tell that story. So welcome, Ian.
Thanks, Cassie. That's quite the intro. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, of course.
Yeah, I kind of found my path, and I was lucky enough. I know a lot of entrepreneurs kind of have the commentary of like, if you can find it early enough on, then there's no question whether or not you're in it or not. And for me, I had just made the high school football team. I was in 9th grade. We were walking off the field. We had a big rivalry game coming up, and the coach just like off the whim mentioned to the other coach that they were looking for t-shirts. And for some reason, I've always been the entrepreneur. Like at one point I got in trouble for stealing, apples off my neighbor's tree, then knocking on his door, trying to sell them back to him. And I've always, my mouth has historically gotten me in trouble. So I piped up and said, like, I could make your t-shirts for you. And he kind of like laughed at me a little bit. And I was like, yeah, no, I totally can. It just so happened the week before that, I was looking for a job, again, like 13, 14 years old. And a friend of mine said, hey, head down to the local lumber yard. It's called Proctor Builders. They're great people. He's like, head down there. I talked to Lee. He can get you a job. It'll be great. And I walk in and I'm, again, maybe 125 pounds. And I'm like, hey, I'm here to apply for the job to help in the lumber yard. And he's like, nah, not going to work. Sorry, I can't hire you legally. And there's no way you can move anything. So that kind of kickstarted like this awkward conversation between him and I. And just like you and I looking at each other, he was unloading equipment, and it happened, he used the word silk screening equipment, and it was screen printing equipment. And I was like, what does that do? And he's like, it makes, we make custom t-shirts. We're just getting in the business. And at that point, it like was starting to register with me that this is really cool. Our school at the time, like school spirit was okay. There wasn't like a key decorator in town. It's a small town in northern Minnesota. There wasn't like a key decorator. There wasn't a retail store. There wasn't a lot of merch. So, I remember going to school and seeing like people in our school wearing other people's schools clothes. And I was always confused. And that was always like kind of a gripe with me, just being like an athlete involved in the school. So I kind of got inspired, and it stuck in my head. And then when the coach was looking for t-shirts, I piped up. I was like, hey, I can do it. And he's like, okay, get me a quote. So I like rushed home, opened up my computer and Googled like, what is a quote? And then like, stumbled on Custom Ink's website, screenshotting everything, like trying to make it as real as possible. And I think I ended up getting them, like 500 t-shirts for $4.95 because of, the way in which the checkout system works there. It just registered at that. And it was like a 6-color front, white t-shirts. And I walk in and I'm like, yep, here's your quote. And he's like, okay, that's a great price. Sounds great. So I then took that down to Proctor Builders and had a conversation with those guys. And, being 13, 14 at the time, it's laughable now, right? Thinking of like a little kid coming in with this first kind of big order. But that really kind of kickstarted this whole, like, what I believe to be as like becoming an entrepreneur and being involved in business. And it really like was mostly problem solving that I loved, but it kind of came through in like customer service, and actually like printing the t-shirts was really fun. And I fell in love with that. And I've always had an appreciation for graphic design. So like those three things coming together, apparel really like lit the fire in me, and I was super excited. I did that for 4 years, and I was kind of in this interesting spot where, do I go to school or do I continue to do this? And I decided to go to school. I got recruited to play football. I didn't end up playing. But then I got recruited for this really cool program at St. John's, small Catholic school in the middle of the state. And they have a global business entrepreneurship program where essentially you get in, you apply, and they take 13 students all over the world, business plan competitions, and your education is surrounded by building a business. So coming in with the concept of having a business and kind of like reusing those skill sets and being able to apply them what I've learned outside the classroom and then learn it in the classroom. Simple things, accounting, cash flow, finance. It really started to become exciting because I was able to understand it outside and then apply it inside. And I was historically a terrible student, but that was a really great program for me because I could travel all over the world, meet a bunch of people, and use what skill sets I had to apply to the actual program. So it was really fun. I
Yeah.
met my wife, classic love story in college, and then I convinced her with her money. So to kind of backtrack, we decided to study abroad so we could drop out early. I launched a backpack making company with her as like a side win joke. She knew how to sew, and I kind of wanted to ask her out. And I was like, "Hey, I'm looking for employees," and she's like, "Okay." I was like, "Yeah, like I'm starting a backpack company." And what started as like kind of this little like way for me to ask her out grew into a Kickstarter campaign. We did like $15,000. And we had sewing equipment in our dorm room. We're making these backpacks on campus, and it was just totally hilarious. But it grew quickly. Like it was like $70,000 in sales in like the first 6 months, and I was like, okay, this is it. This is my big chance. Like I'm gonna drop out of school. Classic garage entrepreneurship story. I'm gonna run with this. And I had plenty of mentors around me saying no, including my now wife, Mary, who's like, if you drop out, I have no way to trust you. You need a backup plan. You got to stay in school. So she proposed that we study abroad for our last year, which would cut off like 6 months of school. I didn't have the money to study abroad, so she was going to lend it to me. I then had cash in hand to bring to the school to essentially put the down deposit on to go study abroad. Got a phone call. The on-campus print shop decided to sell their equipment. I had the money. I went and checked it out, and then I told Mary that I spent all of her money on a bunch of t-shirt printing equipment.
Oh,
I
May.
had 30 days to build a business, relocate to Duluth, Minnesota, hire employees, make sure we could have cash coming in, and set up a print shop. So it was quite frantic, but in like 30 days, we built the concept of Duluth screen printing. So I traveled back and forth, which is about a 2.5 hour drive. While the last like couple of weeks of the semester were wrapping up, launched a website, and like my whole gripe was printing on t-shirts that people want to wear. So t-shirts, not regs. At the time, Bella, Next Level, a lot of people were changing the dynamic of a blank, and we got in early. We got in at the right time, and we started offering, higher end blanks that others were not at the time. And it worked. We continued to grow, so we spent a full summer abroad. I hired a really good friend of mine. He was involved in the business, like making sure things didn't burn down. And then when we came back from studying abroad, I had 6 months to kind of get the business into a spot where I could walk into a job, which is kind of scary because you have student debt at the doorstep, rent, and it's me and my girlfriend, my wife. So like it's two, one income, two people. It was crazy.
I'm
But
laughing because you still somehow convinced her to marry you after
yeah,
all that. Not that
yeah,
it's a
yeah.
bad
That
thing,
was
not at all. But it's just really
we
funny.
we have conversations about that today, and as you could probably imagine, the entrepreneur in me hasn't stopped. So there's more there. It's too
That's
funny.
so
So
funny.
yeah, she's been a saint. Her and I essentially over the course of like 6 months got the business to a spot where we could take a leap. I got a partner. I learned early that like be great at what you're great at, and if you're not great at it, don't do it. And I ended up finding a really awesome business partner who brings the financial component to it, both from like a CFO level and also cash. So we started the business. Her and I moved back to Duluth, Minnesota, with the hopes of revenue flooding in as it did over the last 6 months. But I was so young to business in the game that I didn't realize there's no worse time to launch a t-shirt business than January in Duluth, Minnesota, with negative 30 degrees out and no one needs anything. So it was crickets, and I was just like
Funny.
totally distraught. We were living at our shop, like sleeping on the couch, doing everything we could to kind of make it work. And we got really lucky with just staying honest to our product and staying honest to our customers, and doing everything we could to like find a way in. Um, I was lucky enough to like have success with hiring great people. Somehow just people applying, internships, random people, young people out of school. We built a business off of a lot of, I would say, luck in terms of hiring. There's just great people that came to us, and that's what really built the business. Continued that. So that was 2015. Over the next course, like the 5 years up until COVID, grew the business. I think at the time in 2020, we had, 50 employees. We were just around that $5 million mark in terms of revenue. And COVID hits, the world changes, the decoration industry changes, and I have my first kind of born baby boy, and I become a dad. And that, I think that like really put life into perspective on like what I want to do. I was working
Mm.
60, 70-hour weeks. I wasn't healthy. And at some point, like I felt at that stage of the game, I wasn't a great leader for the business. I was missing something. There was
Hmm.
like some kind of key component, which is a sobering moment to, look at your team and know that like you need outside help, or you need a different perspective, or you need something. So I had a long conversation with my wife, and I'll kind of tie in Jaanuu and like the heartstrings here. But our son was born with a couple small issues, and he's all healthy now. But like the healthcare worker, the HCP at that stage in my life, especially during COVID and having a baby, I grew such an appreciation for them, and it's kind of a beautiful thing. But the long and the short is that we decided that like I needed to find an exit strategy. Just wasn't healthy for the family and working balance. And also, I at the time, like I really needed some leadership coach or help or mentorship on how to grow the business and how to, I would say, look at it from a different perspective. So I thought about, maybe going to get like a master's degree or getting a different job. And in 21, we invested in a Kornit Atlas Max. Industry had changed. A lot of
Mhm.
things were kind of like shaken, and we didn't know if screen printing was going to come back around. So we dove all in on, print on demand, direct to consumer approach, built online stores, shifted our business over the course of 6 months, launched with the DTG. And during that time, I was working on my phase out strategy of essentially selling the business back to a couple of the employees and exiting my position. That was coming to a head. And the in January of 23, I was pretty much out, which felt really good. And Kornit, oddly enough, we had this conversation. There's a couple great people there that I spent time with while we were buying the machine. And I got to know them really well. And I saw a huge gap in the DTG knowledge of screen printing and the smaller decorator and how to like bridge that. There was kind of a big miss when we were buying our machine on correlation, and even someone we could talk to in relation of like modeling, screen printing, runs per hour, just like apples to apples comparison, really simple things, and how it would integrate into your print shop or print flow. Kornit at the time was 350 machines on Amazon. Business was like, exploding, and they're really like the Ferrari of printers. So a lot of people, a small $5 million print shop likely wouldn't make that investment. But I saw a huge need at the time with where the market was at, the industry was at, to kind of jump in. So they offered me a position, and I took it, and I had a ton of fun over the course of 18 months covering all of North America. I think I was in over 120 print shops, $50 million shops down to $3 million shops, essentially being like a good advocate for the business and also their
Mhm.
business. It felt like a really high level kind of consulting role where I would come in and assess whether or not like I think they should get a machine and how it could benefit them. And if, making a jump into DTG was the right step with where DTF might be coming into play, or their size of their business, or who their
Mhm.
actual customer was. So had a ton of fun. I couldn't say, enough great things about working in that company culture and being the entrepreneur and jumping into this, I don't want to say corporate behemoth, but a very big change in my life was an incredible experience.
Yeah. That's where we very first crossed paths. You were kind of in that stage where Kornit was they kind of brought you in as like a case study of that gap that you just talked about, identifying that gap and how what is the role of digital in a similar size shop to what you were running, which was very interesting. And then so talk to me about like that transition, because that's really interesting how you went from like case study, customer of Kornit, you're speaking on their behalf. Now all of a sudden you are a Kornit person. Like you are a Kornit employee representative, whatever. That's really interesting how that all went. What was going through your head at that moment?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say the best way to kind of describe it would be relatability.
Ah,
I walked the walk, started from the ground up with a manual press, grew it to, 3, 4 shop auto, 30 head embroidery machines, a DTG, a DTF. So I knew all the arsenals, I knew the equipment, I knew the chemistry, and then I knew if it actually made sense in their business, being able to talk to them quickly within an hour, where traditionally speaking, right, it's the job of a company to do their best to sell equipment. I would take the approach of like, is it best for you? And a really good example, you take a small $5 million print shop, and at the time, they weren't contract; they were heavily into like racing, so high multicolor, 6, 7 color fronts, 4 or 5 color backs. Their machines were jammed up; they couldn't find a way around it, and they had no ability to sell one-off prints, right? So they were doing high volume, high runs. I think their minimum was like 144. Great business. But when they looked at the revenue, they're like, hey, we have all of these racers that want online stores. We have no ability to carry inventory. Our shop's not big enough. How do we help them with that? And for this very specific case, it made total sense, right? The cost per print was there. They could sell it for 22, $25 per unit. The cost, for printing was maybe a $1.80 in ink and the t-shirt, so at the time, like depending on the case study itself, I would say being able to relate with the business owner, sit down with them. We had mutual rapport because we walked the same steps. We can still hear the clicking of a manual press, as you index it, right? Like that's something that never leaves you, and that was there. And I would say that was like the biggest benefit of working that position and being at that company, and just being able to relate with decorators, because I could walk in and say, hey, I think this actually makes sense, or I would tell them honestly, like I don't. And I did a lot of work with decorators who already made the investment in the equipment, and it was, how do we help you model this to make it a profit engine for your business? So getting in the weeds, understanding, hey, how much are you doing on screen? How do we help convert that to digital? What price point does that need to be at? How can we help you with volume runs? And I worked on a multitude of projects, everything from like, if they hit over 24 units, they'd get a rebate on ink credits. Or if they couldn't invest in a machine, how do we find a way to do like a cost per click model, which Kornit is now, front and center of that. And they're really leveraging their systems to do a cost per click model, because quite honestly, it makes a lot of sense when it comes to DTF and where it's at, and their equipment and technology. So it was a huge eye opener. I traveled all over the world. And then we got pregnant with number 3, which was super fun. So I have a 4-year-old boy, 3-year-old boy, and a 1-year-old girl now. So it was chaos. I was on a plane, you know, I think I traveled 110,000 airline miles that year.
oh,
I lived on a plane. Mary was, again, a saint. But we kind of had, we kind of had like many irons in the fire of where we wanted to be and what life looked like. And it just so happened that, Kornit's US headquarters is based in Newark, New Jersey, and a large part of the decoration market is on the West Coast. And it was really hard to convince someone to get on a 6.5 hour flight, fly out to the, East Coast and do a demo. So I was heading a project to find a demo center or a partner on the West Coast that we could align with to hopefully place the system and use it as a testing facility, training center, and also a spot to bring customers from the West Coast. So I went out, I started with blank brands, and I
yeah.
actually went to next level. I then sat down with Mike Alexander, who is now the CEO at Jaanuu. And Mike at the time was the president at Next Level. Sat down, we had a great conversation about bringing in the machine and building Kornit, essentially a West Coast training center, which would really kind of unite, I would say, the US in terms of their approach.
Mhm.
Um, that, we were working on that project pretty heavily. And then, Mike kind of let me know that he was going to be taking a position with Jaanuu as the CEO. And I was really excited for him. It was awesome. I think 3 or 4 months go by, maybe something like that. And he becomes the CEO, and he joins, and he gives me a call and says, hey, I just came into this business and I'm looking to revamp it. So meeting Mike, he, becomes the CEO at Jaanuu. And 3 to 4 months later, he kind of sends me a note and says, hey, I'd love to hop on a quick call. And we start chatting, and he's like, I'm coming in this business, and I'm looking to really kind of change how premium scrubs are seen in the decoration space. Historically speaking, the distributors of the world, they have never really had a great scrub product. It's always
Yeah.
been kind of bottom of the barrel
Yeah.
at best. And no distributor has ever said like, let's carry a ton of inventory because it's risky. So those two things, as a decorator, we all know you can't trust it. You don't have a great product to sell. Inventory is all over the place, and you don't know if you can actually put it into a program or group. So Mike had this really keen approach of, hey, like if you join the company, here's what I'd love you to do: lead our sales team, come in, be an entrepreneur, have fun, help rebuild this business, and let's launch with S&S or Sanmar, and let's go down the rabbit hole of making decorators have access to a premium scrub brand.
Printing United Alliance is the leading member-based printing and graphic arts association in North America with over 70 years of history and more than 20,000 members worldwide. We're here to support printing professionals like you with the tools, resources, and information you need to grow your business, sharpen your skills, and expand your network. Whether you're a printer, supplier, student, or educator, we've built our community to serve everyone who's passionate about the future of print. An Alliance membership is a smart, cost-effective way to stay current on the latest trends, connect with industry leaders, and give your business the competitive edge it deserves. Head over to printing.org/membership to learn more about the memberships we offer. Let's move the printing industry forward together.
Yeah. So, oh my gosh, and that's so funny because scrubs aren't typically, paid a lot of attention in our side of the industry, right? So, and when I first saw the Jaanuu product, my mind was blown. I was like, I can't believe they feel this way. I would wear these I would wear them. I don't even work in the medical industry. I would wear them because they're super comfy, right? So this is what's fascinating to me is, okay, so you start out as a very young guy launching this entrepreneurial print business. You find yourself, identifying that maybe there's another calling for you. And then all of a sudden this other opportunity presents itself to you. And you're like, maybe this is like the calling. So you have touched everything in the industry, right? Like you have gone from decorator to the equipment side to the blank side. So you've got a lot of experience. Having seen all of these different sides of the industry, what are some of the big observations that you can make? What are some of the things you've seen over the years? What is really kind of defining our industry?
Yeah, it's a great question. Starting out as a decorator, I feel like the printed graphic tee, like the local, your state on a t-shirt, like that bubble hit, and there was micro brands all over the space. So like from 2014 to 2020, I felt like it was kind of a little gold rush, and anybody who could got in. The incoming influencer social media person, right, who like launches a fun brand during COVID, kind of spins up their own print shop. So I think a lot of the early years of a decorator were really around the success of that like bubble market of, hey, graphic tees, local are hot, and we crushed that. We had a resort side of the business. It was a ton of fun. And then when COVID hit, everything kind of changed, right? Everybody's categories and revenue streams as to where they were traditionally selling product changed pretty much overnight. And I think that local t-shirt bubble kind of burst, changing with the times. I know there's a multitude of different trends that have occurred since then. But when I joined Kornit, I would say, I traveling to 120 print shops. There was this really interesting thing where everyone was recovering from some kind of staffing solution, not having enough, not having the right amount of staff, not having the correct staff, or having really great staff and having a ton of success. So that was a big underlining theme that I kind of saw, and I was able to relate to, obviously running my own business. So I think, even today, being heavily involved with communicating, with S&S reps and the decorator customer, that is still a constant. I think as the cost of living rises and you have to pay your staff more, I think more people are looking to either streamline their business, maybe leveraging contract shops with better supply and less demand, going over the border, whatever it might be. So I think that labor crux in our industry is one, really interesting. I think it's pushing a lot more on demand, high margin focus. And that was like a resounding, everybody I talked to, it was labor. And the other one was like mostly everyone was doing their best to continue to fix their operating expenses, reduce them where they can. I didn't see a lot of heavy investment in, like equipment was one because you could displace staff with that, right? Candidly speaking, that was kind of one big thing I saw, but a lot of people were hunkering down, uncertain, and that's, probably still true to this day. But that was kind of the vibe, 120 print shops, whether they were doing 50 million or 3 million, they all had staffing problems. They all were looking for new revenue streams to go after. What's next? What's the next bubble? What can I, go into from a category perspective? Should I dive into corporate? Should I go into healthcare? Should I dive into construction? And, I, as a decorator, could really empathize with that because we were always looking for that next revenue stream, right? What's it going to be? And for us, when the resort business kind of went away, it was, man, it would be great to have this next thing. What is that? And coming into my position at Jaanuu and learning about the healthcare industry and it being such a unique thing where it's a uniform business, right? And people are ordering, an HCP is ordering 6 to 8 sets a year. It's really an annuity. And the way that I've spoken to it with decorators is I think this is like the next best frontier by a landslide. If you look at the healthcare industry as a whole, the aging boomer population, there's a multitude of studies that have come out saying that in the next 10 years, 70% of the jobs in the US that are created are going to be for or around healthcare. And when you look at that and you see, if you're a small print shop or big, like how do you tap into that? How do you get into that quickly? And, Scrubs has been really interesting because you've had this behemoth of a brand, Figs, come out of nowhere and break up the industry and go direct to consumer with a good product. And then there's, the other premium brands like Jaanuu that are in the space. So a lot of Mike's focus and my focus on joining Jaanuu was how do we help the decorator into this last or next best frontier of healthcare? Because it's here, it's crazy, it's annuity, and everybody knows a dentist, a doctor, a nurse. So like getting them a product and having them sample it is always been the easiest way to like really understand how it's helping them perform at work. Budgets matter, like a lot of these hospitals, we know healthcare is expensive, right? And a lot of these hospitals are likely shopping budget. And when you shop budget, you're getting bottom of the barrel when it comes to uniforming. And when that happens, you're kind of putting the healthcare worker in jeopardy of like performance. They're in these 24/7, 12-hour shifts. And if they're wearing something that one doesn't make them feel great and two, they don't look great, it doesn't really do a service for them and doing great work. And, Jaanuu at the forefront has always been a product-driven company. We've always hired the best that we can, gone the extra mile on engineering and manufacturing to not cut corners and really ensure that the product lasts and it fits correctly and helps you perform at your best. So long-winded answer, my travels in the industry have really kind of made me realize that like everyone's kind of waiting for this next frontier. Everybody's hurting on the labor side. Everyone's getting creative on how they're challenging that. Even to the point of where I've seen some print shops stop using some of their own equipment and scale back a team and do more outsourcing. So I think we're at this interesting segue, especially with tariffs and stuff, manufacturing in Mexico and nearshoring. I think a lot of that, from what I'm hearing, is coming back. And a lot of contract decorators who had grown their business during COVID to have such a big supply and not as having as much demand, I'm hearing that's coming back, which is really exciting.
It's interesting to hear you talk about this because, yes, we definitely are making similar observations. And that's what we hear from a lot of the apparelist audience and just decorators at large. I'm curious about your hot take on something. You talk a lot about like when your days with Courtney, there's the digital decoration. How do we automate? How do we, create like faster production, things like that? And then when you think of like the uniform space, and this isn't just necessarily specific to just healthcare, you can think about like construction uniforms, think about things like that. Not traditionally decorated in like a print on demand way. You know what I'm saying? Like there's such this huge push right now for print on demand and custom and all of this stuff. But then when you think of uniforms, And this is just knee-jerk reaction is that, okay, yeah, probably not typically custom work. So this is a really interesting opportunity for decorators to have a couple different business models and approaches. So I'm curious about your hot take on that and like what you would tell decorators about this opportunity and what that looks like with maybe a print on demand business model.
Yeah, I a couple things there. So I felt kind of similar coming into Jaanuu and diving into the business, and I inherited the sales team, which means I got a large book of group business that came with it, right? So in trying to understand, hey, a lot of this stuff is decorated, like a lot of it. And then you like dig into it and it's like 99% of it is decorated. So a lot of these groups and direct accounts that whether it's a floor, a dental office, a spa, whatever it might be that needs scrubs. And a lot of the opportunity exists outside the hospital, but they want a cohesive branded look. They want uniforms. They want to look great. A lot of people spend a lot of money on brand building, and especially that like spa, the studios of the world, even plastic surgeons, right? They have a brand, and those brands need to have cohesive approaches and a look. So most of it is decorated, and I found that. So I was pleasantly surprised. Even more so, on our D2C side, where we're shipping a ton of product every month. Um, it's all getting monogramming, it's getting naming, and we get often the request of like, hey, like, do you have a decorator that I can link up with to get monogramming done? Or hey, do you have a decorator that I can get a logo on? And everyone like the HCPs of the world, it's such a diverse pool of you never know what people are going to put onto their scrub sets, but everything from a teddy bear to a breast cancer awareness ribbon, whatever it might be, there is that side of the market, but 99% of what I'm seeing right now is everyone wants their logo on it, period.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and I hope that like that answers
Yeah.
the hot take a bit. I
Yeah.
would say the other hot take is that I think the software companies of the decoration space have come so far, and I give them a huge like applause because I think we were in this spot of like overnight, and I was an early Printavo adapter, Bruce, those guys, I love them. It changed our business, and I think they have done collectively, every tech-based company has done such a good job getting closer to competing on a uniform level. So as you're setting up these online stores, you can build rosters, employees, credits, and you can actually have it function as a uniform engine and have that functionality. Whereas historically, you order it and that's it. So I think the ties of Shopify and or some of these softwares, they're advancing at a stage where you can run a uniform business really successfully, and those softwares can support that. 5 years ago, even 3 years ago, it didn't seem feasible, but I think a lot of people are now out of the box. They can grab a software and they can really target a large group or uniform business or construction, and they can manage those accounts really well.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. What a great, piece of advice, insight, whatever you want to call it. Great hot take. I think that's really interesting. And it's framing the mindset, right, for the decorators of how do you look at this as an opportunity. Exploring all of the software. I agree, software has come a long way. So very, very interesting. And we are coming close to our time together, but I love, love, love to ask my crystal ball question. And that's, where do you see this industry in 5 years, 8 years, 10 years, whatever? What do you foresee as the future? Anything defining or crazy you think's going to happen?
Interesting. I think the like garage parent looking to make a buck is going to grow. I think
Oh,
they have an account, they can get a distribution, they can get access to apparel, they can buy a machine, DTF's at a spot where you can do it, software's at a unique spot. So I think that's going to grow, and I don't think it's going to go away. I think there'll be turnover, right? Like as that parent ages and their kids out, I think another parent could grab it. But I think, the small town decorator is going to continue to kind of feel that pressure. We love to, do work with people that we know, and I think that's going to continue. So I see that kind of growing. I'm hopeful that the world we live in with AI is coming to a spot where it's only going to help the decorator, right? I know that file management, mock-ups, it's kind of a beast. And, there's a lot of people that spend a lot of money on overhead with labor. So hopefully you can save a little bit on overhead and find better uses for those employees on building stores or doing something else. So I think AI is here to stay. I also, I hope in 5 years we're back to a spot where people love the local decorator. I think with larger mergers, acquisitions occurring and stuff, you're not really knowing who's printing it. I hope that in 5 years, or at least I would love to look into that crystal ball and see that like people love their local decorator, and there's more of like a resurgence to keep it local, print local, go down the street. They can do a great job servicing you, because obviously it's where my heart is. But
Yeah.
also I think there's something to be said about knowing who's making and printing your garments, and they can take care of you. So my hope is that
Mm.
the small town decorator gets more love in the next 5 years, and there's a resurgence there.
Oh man, I feel like I just opened a can because now I'm like, well, we could do a whole episode about that or about AI or whatever. I'm like, oh, I have so many more questions now.
It's all
We're
good.
gonna save that for when we have you on in the future.
There we
Hopefully,
go.
you want
Yeah,
to come back.
we'll check in later. Yeah.
Awesome, Ian. Where can people connect with you, find you, learn a little bit more?
Yeah, add me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there. Outside of that, Ian at jaanuu.com, JAANUU.com. I'll answer my phone for anybody. I'll make time for you if you have any questions about anything that you just heard, or just, healthcare in general, and it kind of being that last frontier as a decorator to attack. Reach out. I'd love to talk.
I love that. Well, thank you, Ian, so much. And of course, you can learn plenty more at apparelist.com, where we have all of our previous episodes of the Apparelist podcast. And wouldn't you know it, there are also 2 other podcasts that live there. We've got Branding Together, our partner podcast with ASI. We also have our Threads of Change podcast that I co-host with the amazing and quite frankly, unreal Christine Shreve. So yeah, be sure to check it out. Reach out to Ian if you want to learn more. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, guys. It was a blast.